Harry S. Truman, the man from Independence, Missouri, a man from the heartland.
Nobody knew Harry Truman very well. He was not one of the major figures of American politics. We've lost this man of great stature, Franklin Roosevelt. How is it possible that this relatively unassuming man from Missouri, this man from Independence, could possibly step into shoes that were that large?
He did it with courage and modesty.
I ask only to be a good and faithful servant of my Lord and my people.
As he took office, the war in Europe was coming to an end. On May 8, 1945, Germany surrendered, but the war in the Pacific was raging. America was in sole possession of the atomic bomb. Truman made an historic decision. He would use the bomb to end the fight against Japan.
You have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans.
152,000 people died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tens of thousands would suffer agonizing effects of radiation. Japan surrendered. The war was over.
This supreme chance to establish a worldwide rule of reason, to create an enduring peace under the guidance of God.
Truman's Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe brought desperately needed help to millions of war victims. In Eastern Europe, the grip of communism was tightening. In 1947, the Truman Doctrine was introduced to protect free countries from the expansionist Soviet Union. It was to be the basis of American foreign policy for the next 40 years. In the election of 1948, Truman was not expected to win. Yet his optimism never wavered.
I want to say to you that for the next 4 years, there'll be a Democrat in the White House, and you're looking at him.
Truman was right.
I, Harry S. Truman, do solemnly swear.
It was one of the greatest upsets in American political history.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The year was 1949, and there was a Cold War. Two superpowers, the U.S. and the USSR, squared off. Capitalism versus communism. When South Korea was invaded by communist North Korea, Truman intervened. The year was 1950. He drew a line against communist expansion. The Korean War would last 3 painful years. 54,000 Americans died.
Fighting the Korean War ended up being an extremely unpopular enterprise. It contributed to a precipitous decline in Truman's popularity.
A sensational conflict developed between the president and legendary war hero General Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur's troops engaged communist Chinese forces against administration policy. Truman fired the popular general. Historians would later give him high marks for the decision.
I shall not be a candidate.
In 1952, Truman decided not to be a candidate for re-election.
When Franklin Roosevelt died, I felt there must be 1 million men better qualified than I to take up the presidential task. But the work was mine to do, and I had to do it. And I've tried to give it everything that is in me.
Harry Truman became the 33rd President of the United States. He had a difficult job, for the United States was still at war. But Harry Truman was tough. He was born in Lamar, Missouri on May 8, 1884, and was the oldest of 3 children. He attended the independent schools when his family moved there in 1890. Because he had to wear glasses from early on, he didn't participate in sports and took up reading instead. He loved American history. As a young boy, he worked for the Kansas City Star and the Santa Fe Railroad. In World War I, he was an artillery officer and eventually became captain, then major. In 1919, after the war, Truman married Elizabeth Virginia Wallace, his high school sweetheart. He started his own clothing store in Kansas City, but the business failed in 1921 during the Depression. His friend Tom Prendergast was a leader in the Democratic Party in Kansas City and helped Truman enter politics. He was elected judge of Jackson County in 1922 and as a county judge from 1926 to 1934. He gained a reputation for honesty and hard work. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1934. Truman became chairman of a senatorial committee to investigate the National Defense Program in 1941 to 1944 during the war years. He cut down waste and corruption in the handling of defense contracts and saved the taxpayers millions of dollars. In 1944, Truman was selected to be FDR's running mate and became the Vice President of the United States when Roosevelt was re-elected. 83 days later, Truman was sworn in as president. He was overwhelmed and asked the country to pray for him. Germany was almost defeated when Truman took office, and they finally surrendered on May 8, 1945. He met with Stalin and Churchill in Potsdam, Germany in July of 1945, and it was there that he learned that the atomic bomb was perfected. He was faced with a terrifying decision. Should he use the bomb? He decided to go ahead and ordered U.S. planes to drop the bomb on Japan. The first one was dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and the second one fell on Nagasaki on August 9th. Japan surrendered on August 14, 1945. The Marshall Plan, proposed by Secretary of State George C. Marshall, that would provide money grants to war-torn countries in Europe, was approved by Truman. Truman was Dewey in 1948, but he made a personal 31,000-mile campaign tour and fooled everyone by defeating Dewey. In 1950, Communist forces invaded South Korea, and Truman didn't wait for the United States to act. He sent U.S. troops and planes to the defense of South Korea. Truman decided not to run for president again in 1952, and he retired to his home in Independence, Missouri. There he wrote his memoirs, and he died on December the 26th, 1972.